participate on our Thursday night concert. George will also be working with his piece Thistledown with the Mizzou New Music Ensemble, which will be performing that piece on Friday night. Though this is George's first in-person residency at Mizzou, he had a virtual residency with us in the spring of 2021 when the Mizzou New Music Ensemble performed his piece, Les Exercices Spirituels. George Lewis is an American composer, musicologist, computer installation artist, and trombonist. He is the Edwin H. Case Professor of American Music at Columbia University, as well as Artistic Director of the International Contemporary Ensemble, a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the American Academy of Arts and Letters, a corresponding Fellow of the British Academy, and a member of the Akademie der Künste Berlin. Lewis's other honors include the Doris Duke Artist Award, the MacArthur Fellowship, and a Guggenheim Fellowship. A member of the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians since 1971, Lewis's work is presented by ensembles worldwide. He is widely regarded as a pioneer in the creation of computer programs that improvise in concert with human musicians. His book, A Power Stronger Than Itself, the AACM and American Experimental Music, received the American Book Award and the American Musicological Society's Music in American Culture Award. Lewis is the co-editor of the 2-volume Oxford Handbook of Critical Improvisation Studies. Lewis holds honorary doctorates from the University of Edinburgh, Harvard University, the University of Pennsylvania, Oberlin College, and Birmingham City University, among others. Please join me in welcoming George Lewis.
This talk is a talk about words and meaning of words, relationship to music, and this is a poem. I don't know if I'm going to be talking about this. I didn't have a lot of time to put this presentation together, but this is a poem by Raymond Queneau, one of the founders of the Oulipo movement in France from the 1960s. Oulipo, Ouvroir de littérature potentielle, a workshop potential literature. And this is sort of like a Chomskyan kind of poem. It's based on the idea, you know that old Chomsky, the syntactical structure, the famous book, and it's sort of he gives an example of the meaning in terms of syntax, which can be devoid of semantical content. One example would be, the famous one is, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. So you can parse that one for a while. It's probably something that ChatGPT already knows. And, but in any event, so this poem is based on that. So it's called 100 milliards de poèmes. That's the name of the book. And it's about 1 million, trillion, billion, or whatever poems, whatever that number of numerical scheme is in French. And so I'm going to talk about words for a while, for the entire time I'm here. So let me just get started. Okay? There was an extraordinary, this extraordinary book that's the book, In the Break, the Aesthetics of the Black Radical Tradition from 2003. Fred Moten, the critical theorist and also a MacArthur person like me, quotes the saxophonist Charles Lloyd, who responds to an invitation to comment verbally on his music. They said, well, Charles, could you talk about your music? He said, oh, no, words don't go there. And so Fred just says, well, where do words go? And that's what this talk is all about, where do words go? And so I'm going to explore that question in a number of different works. But first, this talk is congruent with my ongoing view that a mental envelope of creolization coming out of Edouard Glissant and the people here, Patrick Chamoiseau, Jean-Bernard and Raphael Confiant, Caribbean theorists and writers. This would allow contemporary classical music to move beyond its current pursuit of an identity politics that amounts to a whiteness celebrating sonic diaspora towards becoming eventually a true world music. So these works that I'm going to be presenting tonight, usually I don't talk about more than one of my works at a the talk at the same time, but there'll be a few more than that. And I wanted to give some entree into my compositional processes. And so the idea is that this kind of creolized identity for classical music, a decolonized mosaic identity, recognizes multiple historical, geographic, and cultural cross-connections. And you do that not to achieve diversity, that overused word, but really to pursue what I'm calling, and I'm borrowing from Brian Kernighan and others here, pursue a new complexity. So this is kind of the newest new complexity. The idea is to present a lot more creative depth and to allow new subjects, historical, geographic, ethnic, gendered, and so on, new subjects to be recognized as being part of the classical music discourse, where of course they've always been anyway. So this is a piece called Anthem. I wrote this in October 2011, but in 2009 I wrote this with the ensemble Red Ink, and they wanted a piece of mine they were making a kind of band that would tour very easily. And so the thing is that they feature the wonderful composer and singer, co-founder of Red Ink, Kate Soper. And that brought up a couple of issues. At the time, I hadn't written for voice in a number of years. That seems to be corrected now. I seem to be writing all too much for voice, it seems. And also, I didn't want to emulate the practice of, quote, setting a text. And then the other issue, of course, is whatever I was going to do with the text, where was it going to come from? I mean, I'm not really a creative writer. I'm kind of an academic writer. But I do have some considerable experience with algorithmic processes. And some research I was doing on improvisation brought me to a 1947 book by Sister Miriam Joseph, Shakespeare's Use of the Arts of Language. This was the fruit of her dissertation in the Department of English at Columbia University. And what the book does, you can see here, it neatly taxonomizes and provides examples of the vast 200-some number of rhetorical devices that Elizabethan school children of Shakespeare's time were expected to learn to deploy in extemporaneous, i.e. improvised debate. And this has a pretty long history. We could say one of the first documentation of this kind of a way of speaking, how the rules for extemporaneous speech was Quintilian, who was a student of Cicero, and back in the 1st century AD, with the Institutio Oratoria, a 12-volume work on improvising in extemporaneous debate, speeches, dialogues, arguments, disputations, and so on. So this is the example of all you musicians should know about this syncope or syncope, the evident connection with musical syncopation and surprise, or in the break, as Fred Moten or Count Basie or Catherine Clement might put it, the Catherine Clement, the opera scholar. So many scholars of cross-disciplinary bent have claimed that learning the figures of classical rhetoric would be like learning scales in music. Well, not exactly. Rhetorical figures were processes. Scales could be processes, especially if you're trying to learn them over and over, because no matter how many times you learn the attention thing, you're going to make at least one mistake in the scale of this often. And that's what makes, that's why computer programmers, or musicians are good computer programmers, because they have to be tolerant of many failures over the course of their lives. So I got rhythms A-B-A form, which becomes diacope. You see it here. I got rhythm, George Gershwin, or a horse, my kingdom for a horse, or free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Now, I didn't really use specific rhetorical figures to create the text for this piece, Anthem, which we'll hear a little bit of soon. But regarding the figures as algorithmic processes allowed me to compose both the text and instrumental forms using kind of concatenative procedure. So here's an example, anadiplosis, okay? Oh, I see. It's the slow, I have to wait, it's the slow airplay thing.
We know you know. You know we know. We know you know we know. We know you know. You know we know. We know you know we know.
The repetition of the word ending one clause or sentence at the beginning of the next, anadiplosis. Why lived I, alas? Alas, which loved I?
We know you know. You know we know. We know you know we know.
which I use, is my longtime friend, Laurie Anderson. Laurie is one of the contemporary griots of our time, someone who tells uncomfortable truths to power via song, story, and myth. And this was her breakout musical hit.
Oh, Superman. Oh, John.
So I was able to show Laurie what I did. I said, look, I kind of made a riff on your old piece. And so on. Now, another reference in this piece was James Brown. I think this is going to work. That was very slow.
Sometimes I feel alone. Call another brother. Talk about lazy home. Man, let's do it. Go your home. Let me not go. Man, Lord, brother. Let me not go. Go your home. No time. Come here. We can't do that mess. Go, brother.
So once again, transformed a little bit. So here's yet another reference. Some of you might be familiar with Kouyoumdjian and the Dada, the early Dada artist. And this is his rather famous sonata, the originary primordial sonata, which is, I think, in sonata form. But this is a part of it.
Kurt Schwitters spricht Teile seiner Sonate mit Urlauten. Der Weber, fünf,
Now, it's very interesting. The idea of these are urlauten, in other words, primordial syllables, which are supposedly meant to express, or phonemes, more or less, were meant to express the universal. But not really, it's really just the Indo-European part of the universal. But in those days, they thought those were the same thing. And so, so in any event, it's a very effective piece because it tries to, it evokes, it's very evocative in terms of how these kinds of sounds, even though they don't make any lexical meaning, nonetheless evoke powerful, sometimes powerful emotion within us. So another longtime friend, Stephen Schick, performs the sonata. This is from 2011. And I was composing the piece, and I saw this performance live, and it's quite monumental. The screen that you see is much larger at the Park Avenue Army, New York, than what you see here. And it was just monumental and a bit scary.
Rocket baby, tick the baby, rinsk the baby, rocket baby, tick the baby in skirt, rinsk the baby in skirt, rocket baby rinsk tick the baby in skirt, rinsk the baby in skirt, rocket the baby in skirt, tick Tick baby insecure music, tick baby insecure music, rock the baby insecure music, tick baby insecure music, insane, rock the baby insecure music, insane, rock the baby insecure music, insane, tick baby insecure music, insane, rock the baby insecure music,
I was looking at this monumental face of Steve wearing this ratty suit. And something I realized what Anthem needed to be about. It needed to be about power, from the Romans to the triumph of the will and beyond. Now, Kathleen Clement, I mentioned earlier, who writes in her book, Syncope, The Philosophy of Rapture, tyrants willingly use musical accompaniment in their group celebrations. And we've learned recently, we keep learning it over and over, with the current presidential election and so on, coherence of the utterance is not a requirement. Overwhelming monumentality and the projection of power was the message of, if you saw the movie 1984 of Big Brother fascism or V for Vendetta or those kinds of movies. So this guy speaking total nonsense yet projecting power, kind of like the nightly news, at least on some TV stations. So now I'm going to watch a section of this work performed by this during the pandemic by this incredible group based in Austin, Texas, called Less Than 10. This is a picture, the image from the CD, which was just released and has a lot of interesting essays on the complete opera. This opera is based on the development of the African American Experimental Music Collective, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, or the AACM, which I joined as a teenager in 1971. Founded on the south side of Chicago in 1965, the AACM has long played an internationally recognized role in American experimental music. So I developed, again, I had to be the person who wrote the libretto, despite what they say about musicians who write their own libretto, despite lawyers who represent themselves, they have a fool for a client. And so I have a fool for librettists. But nonetheless, I developed the libretto from transcriptions of nearly 100 interviews, newspaper accounts, and audio recordings of early AACM meetings, all of which I gathered for the book. Now, as the action unfolds, we witness young black experimentalists interrogating many issues: power, authority, identity, representation, culture, economics, politics, and aesthetics, or self-fashioning, self-determination and self-governance, personal and professional and collective aspiration, race, gender, and sexuality, and tradition, innovation, change, spiritual growth, death, and rebirth. So the aim of the lead artist, me as composer, and two directors, the film theater artist Catherine Sullivan and composer-director Sean Griffin, was to create what we call a Bildungsopera. I thought I was pretty slick. I said, it's not going to be a Bildungsroman, come-to-age novel. I can't call it a Bildungsopera. I thought it was pretty cool. But it turned out that the magic fruit is a Bildungsopera. least Mozart never was. and Humboldt, Schiller, all big fans of the idea. But in any event, there's the proof also there was such a thing, a coming-of-age opera of ideas, positionality, and testament. So part of my task in writing the book, and this is Muhammad Abrams, the AHM co-founder in 1977, part of my purpose in writing the book, part of my task, was to find responses to the question of how these musicians transformed themselves from fairly conventional jazz musicians of the kind that people generally characterize them as, to whatever they became. Now, this is what Muhal's music sounded like in 1957. This is 1967, same person. Somehow people thought they were the same, and they could both be characterized under the genre label of jazz, whatever jazz is. And so, but this actually example shows us why I've come lately to regard genre as an addiction, a deadly addiction, which the field of music, unlike say visual art, is particularly and balefully yoked. My concern for new music in particular is that these kinds of addictions, well, I tried to write this. I wrote an article in the New York Times. I published it on composing while black, and about what they call lifting the tone of black composers. You could look it up, even now if you like. And at a certain point, I wrote in the Times. I said, well, this kind of addiction to whiteness that the field has, like most addictions, it kills you after a while. They didn't print that. But in any event, I'm telling you now that these kinds of addictions are no less deadly to our field than their pharmaceutical counterparts are to our bodies. For example, in contemporary visual arts, scholarship and criticism most focus on practices and historical periods. Landscape painting, that's a genre, but painting isn't a genre, it's a practice. But music, genres also often function as institutionalized modes of kinship-like discourses. Genre, genetics, that kind of thing. And these become naturalized by institutions and fields and critical discourses, and their racial metonymics in particular also become embedded to the detriment of both the artist and the field. So until recently, genres were things that you could say, well, this genre is a black one, this genre is a white one. Some guy who's it, Lil Nas X had a hard time being country, or Beyonce, these kinds of things. So you see right away the genre is thought of as a kind of racial policing. But for us, that's not going to work, and it ends up killing us. So we have to kind of let it go. So I'm hoping that all of you can consider doing that. So So I'm going to play now a short speech by one of the original members of the AACM. And this gives us a glimpse into that issue, as well as illustrating how we translated that book that you saw, The Power Strong as Hell, which is actually, John, you had that book, right? Can you show us what it looks like? He had the book for some odd reason. It's a big ass book. It's 17 pages. So how does that become an opera? I have no idea. So this example comes from the recordings that Muhal today, and thank you, John, that's very nice, he made a number of recordings. They thought, well, if we're going to have an organization, we're going to have like a paperless office, and we're not going to take minutes, right? We're just going to we're not going to have written minutes. We're going to have everything on tape, so you can go back and listen anytime you want. That doesn't really work. You kind of need both. But it turned out that, 30 years on, me trying to write this book, it was like a total boom. Because I could see what everyone said, including people that I knew, and what they did back in 1965, and I was writing in 1999, 2000. So it was invaluable for the historian. So here, this is saxophonist Gene Easton. He's speaking on this. And by the way, this very sleepy person, that's me. I'm over here on the right here. And this is rather late at night. And so Gene is providing a sense of his own dreams and aspirations. The goal of the ACM is to create original music, quote unquote, rather than the forms of music to which these working musicians were confined by genre discourses, racialized genre discourses, the received genres that racialized identity and positioning, that was trying to oblige them to adopt these names for themselves forever. And that, by the way, goes along with what happened in a lot of African American communities where people did change their names for similar reasons of self-determination. So Easton makes an explicit connection between music and larger societal structures. Only a new music that expresses who they are will set them free.
I think we're getting closer to this, to an explanation of this term, original music. Among some of us, it means something a little deeper than others. Original, in one sense, means something you write in a particular system that we are locked up with now in this society. We express ourselves in this system because it's what we learn. And as we learn more of other systems of music around the world, it's quite natural today, and we're getting closer to music that our ancestors played and which we are denied the right to really stretch out in. And this term original, I feel that the authors of this business structure here had in mind more so sound-conscious musicians. If necessary, finding a complete new system that expresses us. If you don't express anything that is known, you're ostracized.
So I found this to be a very remarkable, this is a private meeting. The AACM hadn't been formed yet, and they were trying to figure out what they were going to do to form an organization. This is an amazing expression of aspirations. The system, you write in the system that we're locked up with now in this society. If you think that just refers to music, I could sell you the Brooklyn Bridge or anything. We're talking about, this is 1965. We're talking about, bombings in churches, trying to break out of Jim Crow, civil rights, riots in the streets, all kinds of things. People are trying to break out. So they're making a connection between the music, which they're locked in, and the society that's being locked into. So the belief is really that we need to find a complete new system that expresses who we are. And if we can do that, we can set ourselves free. It's a very important idea that comes out of the AACM. So I thought, well, how do I make this is great, how can I use this in the opera? It's a big scene. And I said, well, I don't have to do very much. I can just let him talk. I don't have to really say anything. I don't have to add stuff or take, the composers do, put the front and the back and transform things and do little phony, no one understood that. I wanted to make something that I could leave this to the legacy of younger members of the AACM that understand what's being said, plus the general public. At the same time, I wanted to say it my way. And so people were saying, well, this is weird, George. You wrote this thing, it doesn't sound like the AACM. What do you mean? What does the AACM sound like? There's 100 people in the AACM. We can't all sound alike. And I'm in the ACM too, so this is my contribution to it. It's not the same as Henry Treadwell's contribution, or me and Claudia Myers. This is what I do, or part of what I do. And so everything I've done that you've heard so far here relates to the ACM just as much as what Don Moye was doing. So anyway, so here we are. This is the aria, sort of based on this, you'll hear it.
I think I see it now.
You learn that people who came with particular dogmas in the ACM, they didn't last long. It wasn't like that people would be hostile to you, they just couldn't pay attention. So you think you should go this way? Well, we voted you down, so you're out. so that's it. So in the end, so that was how it worked there. So for the last part, I was part of this panel. And there was a real princess on this panel from Thailand, and it was on curating, decolonizing and curating discourse in Europe. And I want to use this by way of introducing my 2021 work, Amo, for the Neue Vokalsolistin, with reference to work I did in Berlin during the pandemic at the Wissenschaftsschule in Berlin, the Advanced Study Institute. I gave a talk at this conference, and I was trying to be a bit provocative with an opening gambit. What's the sound of colonialism? Wie klingt Kolonialismus? Okay. So, and my feeling was that I had read Kouyoumdjian, I just met him, it was great. I finally just met him. But I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I realized, well, I feel that we kind of already know what colonialism sounds like, because we hear it all the time at contemporary music festivals around the world, as they participate in this continuous recirculation of the stereotype of exclusive whiteness around classical music self-image. We get, you know, as Stephen Freund mentioned, I was the artistic director of the International Contemporary Ensemble, and our notion is a kind of polyaspora, which is not a diaspora, but the idea that we're without festen Wohnsitz, we're without a fixed abode in how we act as subjects in the world. And so we did a concert called Polyaspora at the March Music Festival in Berlin this past March. And it hadn't occurred to me, but I was looking at it, I was trying for like maximum diversity, so we had an Iranian composer, we had two black composers, one from Switzerland and one from, actually both from Switzerland. And we had someone from Palestine, Palestinian composer, we had a lot of different people. And then I realized, I was talking to some people in the audience, and I realized, wow, this must strike you guys as being really strange, because unlike almost all the concerts you go to in Germany, there's no white supermajority in this concert. You know, in other words, in fact, there's only one token Bavarian guy. And so it was like maximum diversity. That might have left someone thinking, well, where are all the white people? Is this like a great replacement theory or where? So I was wondering, maybe some people like the idea, and others were kind of threatened by it. But in any event, the article I published in that talk is called New Music Decolonization, 8 Difficult Steps. It's asking, how can we counter the impoverishment and devolution of our field that results from the consistent absences of the same ethnic, racial, and gendered voices from stages, media, music histories, and professional networks? What would a decolonized curatorial regime sound like? Well, we kind of know, thanks to this guy, we kind of know what it would look like. With the academic document at 11, 2002 document of the famous German-based Kassel art exhibition biennial, when the late Nigerian Okunweze became the first non-white curator. And Documenta, two art historians, said that Documenta basically painted a picture of contemporary art as a network in which New York, Lagos, London, Cape Town, and Basel were more or less equally important to a contemporary canon, and similarly crucial in understanding contemporaneity itself, as opposed to some centers being exotic margins and others more genuinely cosmopolitan and contemporary. So with Amo, my piece, I found a new historical subject for new classical music. That's a picture of Amo as a child. He was born in 1703, passed away around 1759, 18th century philosopher. He was brought to Germany as a small child from a region in present-day Ghana. And he was the noble family that he served, the Wolfenbüttel, you can still find the Schloss Wolfenbüttel somewhere around there, allowed him to be educated. As it turned out, he was actually, under normal circumstances, he would have been headed back to Africa to teach Christianity to heathens. But somehow there was a change in heart of the family, and instead of that, they sent him to law school. And then they sent him to philosophy school, and he completed his law school training at the University of Halle in 1729. And he did further studies and was a teacher of philosophy in Wittenberg, Halle, and Jena before returning to Africa around 1750s, about a few years before Kant began to publish his early works. And I've often said, I think that Kant knew who Amo was. He must have heard of him. I mean, come on, an African died teaching philosophy in Germany. He had to know about it. So that kind of news definitely gets around. And he was actually the first philosopher of African descent since Augustine to become known and influential in Europe during his time. However, in one text, Kant dismisses the possibility that something intelligent could once have been said by an African on the grounds that this fellow was quite black from head to toe, a clear proof that what he said was stupid. By the way, this is by no means an isolated incident in Kant's writing or that of other Enlightenment thinkers. For example, that particular quote shows the influence of David Hume on Kant. And this basically says, if you think Kant's a racist, you should read it. Well, the thing was, the guy who wrote that was the head of some huge Kant archive in, Germany, and he seemed like he was in a bubble because there's 30 years of scholarship on this point. I've read it, and I'm just a philosophy fanboy. You know? And it says basically that whole thing about, it calls him the father of scientific racism. So it goes on, it talks about his ideas. Humanity is has its greatest flowering in the race of white. The yellow Indians have sort of much less talent, and the blacks, the niggas, are much deeper, and so on and so forth. on. So all this is in Kant's thinking, and it turns out that Kant actually gained a lot of his knowledge about the world, how brilliant he was. He loved reading travel books, because he didn't travel very much. He stayed in his hometown for most of his life. So anyway, just read that, and when you're reading Critique of Pure Reason, just look at that part. So here's a little bit about Amo. I think this is right.
Steht das Vokalwerk Amo von George Lewis. Der Titel geht zurück auf den Philosophen Anton Wilhelm Amo. Er lebte von 1703 bis 1759. Als kleiner Junge war Amo aus Westafrika nach Deutschland gebracht worden, wahrscheinlich als Sklave, und kam zum Hof Braunschweig-Wolfenbüttel. Hier bekam er eine schulische Ausbildung, absolvierte später sein Studium und arbeitete dann als Dozent an den Universitäten in Halle und Jena.
Amos Geschichte ist eine deutsche Geschichte, eine afro-deutsche Geschichte, und für mich zeigt viel über Erfahrungen und Handlungen mit Race und Kultur in Europa, auch im 18. Jahrhundert, aber auch in die heutige Auswirkung.
Erklärt der amerikanische Komponist George Lewis im digitalen Interview. Der Text der Komposition Amo basiert auf einem aufklärerischen Aufsatz des Philosophen von 1734 mit einem ziemlich langen Titel in lateinischer Sprache. Und der lautet in voller Länge: Disputatio philosophica continens ideam distinctam eorum quae competunt vel menti vel corpori nostro vivo et organico. Und übersetzt heißt das in etwa: philosophischer Vortrag, der eine bestimmte Vorstellung von den Dingen enthält, die unseren Geist oder unseren lebendigen und organischen Körper betreffen.
Or translated to English, philosophical disputation containing a distinct idea of those things that pertain either to the mind and to our living and organic body. And that's written in 1734. I play that mainly because it's amazing to me that in Germany someone can come on the radio and they start speaking Latin to you. It's incredible. They say, because, I mean, I didn't learn that in school. Maybe you did. Did you learn that? You didn't do it? Okay, you did. So you can read this. So it's great. So no, I didn't learn it at all. It's like, it's amazing. You're just showing off here, but it's really cool. So the text itself for this piece is sung in German, English, Latin, Dutch, and the African language Twi, reflecting the community of Amo's birth. Amo speaks of God as not a singular spiritual entity, but in relation to other possible spiritual entities, which indicated to me a very subtle infusion of African philosophical tenets into the Western philosophical discussion. Also, Amo regards both God and these spirits as powerful, but not all powerful, because they're ultimately limited because they lack a living and organic body. So there are three types of software I was using to do this. One is Ableton Live, that's on the top left, and Finale, which is over there, and then there's a Max Patch, which is a pretty complicated Max Patch. It's like, it does spatialization, it does sound trajectories. You can change the sound of the singers, transpose patches up and down, play them backwards, play multiple delayed copies, make the sounds rougher or more electronic. And you heard some of that. You can cause them to move around the halls, circling, squaring, side by side, zigzag, and all that. And in performance, each rehearsal number is a cue that corresponds to an electronics preset composed by me for that section of the piece. So there are 7 scenes in Amo, and for the short time we have remaining, I've taken excerpts from some of these scenes. So see those little squiggles up top of some of the notes? That's called a Jones song. It's a Korean Nongyeon notation. And I started using these notations in pieces around about 2017, 2018, when I went on a 2-week workshop in Korean traditional music in Seoul, and I actually composed a piece. And that piece, the first use of these kinds of things is kind of vibrato, which you'll see this routinely in my scores, including the one that's being played called The Formation of Mastery. So the John song is like a quick race, like that kind of thing, things like that, and the growing and fading vibratos. So it sort of sounds like this in Korean traditional orchestra. You've got the front row there on this side. These are the ajings, which are played either with bow or clock, two kinds of bows, a wooden bow or a hair bow. And those would be in the usually where the cellos would be in a Western orchestral score. And behind them, you've got the gaigums over here. Over here in their same spot, you've got the kamungos, and over here you've got the haegums, that would be in the violin section, there are 2 strings. And then in the back, you've got the taegums, which are sort of like flutes, but they have this incredible membrane and really buzz. And they're capable of much wider kinds of vibrato than the Western flutes are. And then on the other side, you've got the putis, which are kind of like double reed, very loud, iki-like instruments. And in the back, you've got the percussion. So, and there are no brass. The periods are considered like brass instruments. So, all of that, and the thing is, I want to point out that this piece may sound kind of like non-tonal, but in fact it's written in the key of B flat, because you have to do like flat keys. That's how they write for this orchestra, so everything is in flat keys. So you have to, well, I have to work too hard to make it sound like it wasn't B flat.
Soft
Well, so that's pretty much it. So this is question time. We have maybe only a few minutes. So get right in there right now. Ask something. Yes?
Thank you for the stimulating talk. I was wondering, what's your take, your view on intelligibility and languages and dialects in the text for music, and also what's the emotional or perceptive impacts in themselves and in relation to each other within those different phonemes versus full words and full sentences, or dialects and languages people don't understand. And then how do you achieve prosody between your words and music? Or maybe that's not what you're going for, and how do you view music with words versus not?
It's interesting. As you can tell, I played both sides of the street. There was parts that were sort of intelligible to anyone who spoke English anyway. I mean, I've sat through lots of operas and other pieces of languages I don't understand. So that's different from the notion of intelligibility. So the question is, could I understand it if I knew that language? There's some of them that, regardless of whether you know the language, they're making kind of their own private language, using the words, using the phonemes, using the sounds. I think that's another way to go. And it's funny, I don't like taking a position on that and saying, well, here's how I do it, or here's how it should be done, or any of that. My feeling is that you use what works at the time. And what I'm hoping for is to make evocative sounds that move people, and there are many ways to do that. There is a crisis of intelligibility, though, that's afoot. And if you read, for example, Stanley Cavell's well-known article, the philosopher, called Music Discomposed, Stanley Cavell, in addition to being sort of a major theorist of moral perfectionism, was also a theorist of intelligibility. So you might want to look at that as being something where you take an interesting position on people like Ernst Krenek versus and Beethoven, and both of them facing these issues of intelligibility. Hope that helps. Yes? Yes.
I've worked with some of the musicians and composers out of Los Angeles, African People's Orchestra, Horace Tapscott. He, the other organization, which I guess has some parallels to ATCM. And I'm curious about your take on the genre examination. He liked to use the term Afro-American classics in reference to what will often be timed like Duke Ellington's music or jazz and even other stuff. And I even saw that term in that Pixar film Soul used to refer to jazz. Now, is that also a problem? You know what I mean? And I'm wondering if that's like a further, deeper sort of influence of the sort of aspect you're talking about, where imposition on them.
Well, I only met Horace a few times. Actually, he performed in one of my sort of theater works in Amsterdam. And that was a very interesting one called The Empty Chair. He did wonderful things in that. But if I look at the AACM as an example, creative music, their notion of creative music was not looked at as a synonym for another way of talking about jazz. They wanted to exit that discourse. And so the thing was, you can't exit a discourse while using its name or making up fake versions of it that somehow says, oh, it really means this. No, it really means what we want it to mean. So creative music, first of all, who was calling black music creative? Nobody. So they were calling it noisy or unintelligible or stupid. And so people said, well, no, it's actually creative music. You pass by the Symphony Hall in Chicago and you see, there'll be big banner headlines, great performances. Well, that didn't mean us, I mean, that was like a coded racial appeal. And so I think other people were saying, like, for example, Rassan, the idea of African-American classical music, I think that's been taken up from time to time. I certainly don't have any problem with that. And so the thing is, though, when you make up your own word, you should say what you want it to mean. And it sort of becomes like Lewis Carroll then. It's sort of like, it's the question of whether one word can mean so many things. And whoever it is, the other character says, well, no, it's not a question of that. It's just a matter of which meaning is going to be the master. That's all. So when you look at it like that, I'm not looking for synonyms, or I'm looking for a total transformation of the discourse. So that's what I think the ACM was trying to do. I can't speak for what Horace and his staff are trying to do. Yes, please.
Can you just say what was it about Chicago in particular? Why Chicago, ACM in Chicago is there something? I'm curious. I live in Chicago now. So.
Well, I don't think it's all Chicago. You had an analogous organization called the Black Artists Group in St. Louis. That started around the same time. They got together. You had Julius Hemphill, you had Oliver Lake, you had Bobo Shaw, and plus they were an interdisciplinary group. You had like Pat Cruz, you had Milo Cruz doing theater. They started out, as I wrote in the book, as you see a section of the book, because they were working with Catherine Dunham, but they felt a little constrained by her view of things. So they struck out on their own and began to think about how they could form an organization that was interdisciplinary. And whereas the ACM, they said, well, that's just about music, but we want to encompass all the arts. So maybe you sort of think about, well, what was it about the Midwest? But then you've got like the Pan-African People's Orchestra and that whole scene out in LA. So what was it about the United States maybe that was interesting in terms of forming collectives? And how come even New York tried to form collectives, the Collective Black Artists of New York, you had that. So I think it was a question more of the time. People were tired of coalition politics. They were tired of, at the time, multiracial strategies where it was assumed that the white people would always be in charge of whatever the multiracial strategy was. And so we have to create our own stuff. And they were influenced by Black Power movement and things of that sort. Stilton Carmichael was coming to her saying, well, if you want to do something for us, go into your community and try to make change there rather than telling us what to do. And so these kinds of strategies, they weren't regional, they were national. And actually, in a way, they're kind of international if you think about it. So Composing While Black tells part of that story as well. This is our bilingual book, English-German. We made this part because Harald Casidu is Afro-German. He was born in Hamburg, which turns out to be quite a location for people of Ghanaian descent who moved to Germany. But also because Germany is kind of a center for new music. We wanted this to be accessible in Europe to people who spoke a major European language. So that's why we made it bilingual. So it's another form of trying to create communities. Others? Yes, please.
I know that you were close with pianist Jerry Allen, and I spent a lot of time studying her words over the course of the last semester. I was really struck by how she was always a ardent supporter of academic writers of music, and especially coming from a tradition of music that traditionally has been kind of anti-academia as a whole. I was curious what your thoughts are on
who's anti-academic?
Jerry Allen.
She's anti-academic?
No. She's pro it. I'm saying that Jerry Allen comes from a tradition that is maybe a little bit less in favor of academia as a whole, even though she really.
I don't know about that, Jack. I'd have to push back to you on that. I mean, the problem with it wasn't they were anti-academic. It was no one let them in. I mean, so the ACM is an autodidact movement. And the reason for that, I mean, Muhal tells the story, right? He's sitting in some place and he's going to some school, and the professor says, well, so I was at this jam session the other night, there was this harmonization of this chord, and I just couldn't figure out, what were they doing? I mean, how do you do this? And Muhal's thinking, wait a minute, you don't know how to do this? And I'm learning from you. And so he quits, and so he goes off on his own. So no, I don't think that if we're calling jazz or great black music, whatever, I don't think it's anti-academic at all. I think it. Now, but let's go a little further into Jerry Allen. I mean, she's not an anomaly. Anyway, people did things outside of the academic movement because they weren't embraced in it. Like you couldn't find Composing While Black workplace that didn't take place in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s was in the academic community, which were these all-white composition faculties, all-white male composition faculties, and so on. So you couldn't get in, you couldn't affect change. So, so people who do things outside the system, you know, like Yusuf Latif, for example, the examples are legion. So Jerry Allen was actually taking advantage of her academic positions at the University of Pittsburgh and before that the University of Michigan to create all kinds of new communities and to think hard about technology, including interactive internet technology and things of that sort. So yeah, I knew her pretty well. But she was an experimentalist in every way, and we miss her a lot. All good? Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. I got disconnected.